Hello, my friends, and welcome to my first ever live stream. Now, I'm going to admit I'm primarily doing this at the moment so that YouTube algorithm will better promote my videos talking about conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, and all things of that nature. This stream is also going to be mostly a systems test, as I understand no one's actually going to be watching. I'm using this just to make sure everything's up and running and working, and hopefully I'll be able to do future streams. I've got my newest video gearing to publish here in the next about 45 minutes. It's going to be episode 10 of the Kyle Talks series. For those who aren't already aware, Kyle Talks is a series where I'll be reviewing TikTok videos, Reels, Instagram clips, maybe some YouTube videos, pretty much anything that, any form of media, really. The topics we're looking at are going to be primarily conspiracies, government cover ups, aliens, um, spirituality, science, perhaps a little bit of mysticism. We're going to be looking at ancient civilizations, questioning everything, as we should. Now, all of this is done through a lens of skepticism. While I do believe in many of these topics, I don't believe every single messenger claiming to be representing or sharing information on these types of topics. I'm going to admit, I don't really have too much pre-planned for this stream. I'm really just going to kind of wing it and get comfortable even being in front of a camera. Now, I do have another YouTube channel. It is McCamey Medieval Combat. This channel would be dedicated to sword fighting. Now, when I say sword fighting, I don't mean like LARPing or playing around with foam swords or sticks, nor do I mean stodgy stuff up or stuck up nose in the air, like Olympic style fencing. Hey, not hating, but it's not my style. For me, fencing is a martial art, and a martial art should be treated with respect and a little bit of care. My own interest in it is really on the sport side of it. I really just love sparring. I like gearing up, and I like beating on my friends with steel swords. And I don't mind getting hit by them either, although I have had a couple of injuries. Nothing major. I've been hospitalized only one time doing sword fighting. And even then, it was really more of just a wellness check after an injury that could have been life-threatening, but ended up thankfully being nothing. To give you a little bit of detail, generally, when you stab somebody with a steel sword, it collapses so that you don't kill your sparring partner. We had a malfunction with the sword that decided not to collapse, though it was meant to. I took a stab from that sword right here, ended up ripping through this muscle. Thankfully, it didn't break the flesh, but it still drove a hole through the muscle, hit the bone here, and then bruised my sternum all the way out here, blacked me out on my feet, couldn't breathe. And I finished fighting. But afterwards, I tried to just shrug it off, went home, went to lay down. And as I was laying down, it felt like there was a bag of bowling balls sitting on my chest, preventing me from breathing. So I had to go to the hospital, get some x-rays and stuff done. Thankfully, it was nothing life-threatening. However, it very easily could have been. My rib bone stopped at the blade. Had it slipped through them, it would have hit a lung. No more Kyle. But I got lucky. And although that was about 4 years ago today, I will say that wound has never fully healed. It's still tender pretty much 24/7. I don't think it's ever actually going to heal. So I say that to say it's a dangerous sport. It's definitely not the SCA or LARPing or, any of those kind of pretend fencing things. Same thing with Olympic fencing. They're using those flimsy little toothpicks that, hell, you don't even need to wear padding in order to fight safely in those things. You just need something that's cut proof in case they break. I'll admit, I do have a 9-to-5 job. I'm still in the middle of my work day, but it's not a very demanding day. It's also my first day back from being on leave for a while. So primarily today is just me playing catch up. So please don't mind if I'm looking aside just to make sure I'm not missing any important communications. And on that note, hold that thought. Looks like Hurricane Beryl's getting ready to strike down. We've been talking about that on my channel quite a bit. I'm convinced Hurricane Beryl's man-made. I am. Any more these days, I get suspicious at all extreme weather events. I understand the majority of them are going to be just extreme weather events, but I do think our government's manipulating the weather. I think they've been doing it for decades. It's only just now that it's starting to get detectable. What's been going on with that blob over on Bouvet Island, essentially carving the path where Hurricane Beryl formed from. I think that was a test of hurricane generating technology using audio frequencies to try to heat the water and push the waves, and in doing so, generating hurricane. I also think that this technology we have had for a long, long time, ever since it was stolen from Tesla by JP Morgan and then presumably purchased by the US government for weapons and military research. HAARP comes to mind. For those who don't know, HAARP is HAARP. It's based out of Alaska, and it's a science project with military backing that manipulates the ionosphere, and in doing so, actually has the ability to affect weather and create things like earthquakes and tsunamis. It was stolen from Tesla Tech. He had a program called the Wardenclyffe Tower. The Wardenclyffe Tower was brilliant. It essentially, if you think of the ionosphere as having a lightning bolt constantly moving in a circle around the Earth, around the globe, every time that lightning bolt comes back around, you'd spank it with electricity and it would move a little faster. Come back around, spank it again, moves a little faster. You do that enough and it starts to actually build up enough kinetic energy and static energy, I guess I should say, that the ground essentially becomes powered. This is how Tesla was able to plug light bulbs into a hillside and make them turn on. Well, the other thing that he realized is if you focus that energy into a singular point, you can essentially, at that point, you can call it a super weapon, right? This terrified him. That's why he shut it down. It wasn't until JP Morgan came and stole all of his devices that Wardenclyffe Tower got packed up and hauled off to Alaska, where they rebuilt it as the HAARP platform. And then the HAARP platform got shut down for a while and rebuilt off the US coast, Pacific coast, with a platform that's run by the Pentagon. Essentially the same thing, but with upgraded tech. Now, the idea is you take an energy blast from the ionosphere and you focus it into a single point, say a fault line, you can cause a major earthquake. The first time this was rumored to have been tested was in 2008 in the island of Haiti. The earthquake. That's right. The poor side of the island was completely vanquished. Thank God the Clintons were there to save everybody. Except they didn't save anybody. In fact, they just built condos on the rich side of the island and left all the poor beggars to their fates. It was also a nice coincidence that when this earthquake happened, we already had a fleet of naval carriers in the harbor. If you remember back in 2010, the aflocalypse, all those birds were dropping dead out of the sky by the hundreds of thousands. Fish were washing up on shore by the millions, crabs dying, sea life all over, and all of them had the same kind of blunt force trauma. Their heads exploded. This was manipulation of the ionosphere through radio waves, and it was one of the first live tests of that program. And at that time, they had already determined it worked by testing it on Haiti. So what did they do? Well, we know we can generate earthquakes, but I wonder, can we make tsunamis? And that's when Japan happened. I think the tsunami in Japan that followed with the Fukushima meltdown was a test of that Wardenclyffe Tower, the HAARP platform. And I think that it's been used multiple times to create false weather events so that we can defeat political rivals, or so that we can try to show up as the hero to save the day. At this point, I don't trust any natural disaster. Now, the nice thing is there's generally telling signs: sudden die-offs of animal life, aurora borealis being seen when it otherwise shouldn't or wouldn't be. The aurora borealis actually being 90% of the time a man-made creation because of HAARP and the manipulation of the ionosphere. These are things that have been stewing around in my head for the last 20 years. I first opened my eyes during 9/11. I was in school at the time. teenager, and I knew something was up. And it didn't take long for documentaries and things to start coming out. And back then, I mean, we really didn't even have much social media other than MySpace. So you had to actually go and search. Thank God for Alex Jones, because it was discovering Infowars and seeing that 9/11 was perpetrated by our government that made me start to open my eyes and question everything. It made me awake, but not woke. All right, give us just a second. Let me just check in with work. I got to make sure I'm not missing anything critical. Yep, give me one moment. Just about done, and then I'll get back with you. I mean, obviously, it's not like anyone's really going to be watching, so I don't think you guys mind if I go ahead and get a little bit of my day job done.
What are you doing?
I am live streaming so that I can please the YouTube algorithm gods and maybe actually get some folks to watch my channel. So I asked my hundreds of thousands of viewers to just please chill the F out for a second while I get some of my day job done. And then I'll be right back with them to talk about more random bullshit to please the YouTube gods. Oh, just another minute, my adoring fans. All right. I appreciate your patience. So, I'd like to keep this live stream going for at least 30 minutes just to give it a little bit of length. At the same time, in the event that someone does ever decide to watch this down the road, let's give you a topic to cover. So, I don't want to go ahead and burn through any of my talking points when it comes to conspiracies and such, as we'll save those for future videos. So, let's talk swords. You guys see all the wall over my shoulder here. So if we go from top to bottom, at the top is the most expensive of my training swords. It's made out of excellent steel. It's got great flexibility. This sword has the ability to almost bend completely in half before returning true. And that's going to be the same for most of the swords on that wall. Now on the top is a long sword, and it is modeled after the 15th century German longswords. That one is called the Ensifer Kron. It's $500 to $700 generally for an Ensifer of that sword. That would be a tournament sword. It's a nice light steel that you can really wail on people with without having to worry about adding, extra padding or steel plating to the outside if you're gambesson. Now, right below it is a significantly less expensive, but lovely sword. Also a long sword. This one is more to the style of the Italian master Fiore de Libri. He was a 14th century fencing master who wrote the book The Flower of Battle. The sword on the wall, second from the top, that long sword, doesn't have as much flexibility, and it's got a little bit more weight to it. So it's one that you do have to treat with a little bit more care when you're fencing. It's also more likely to tire your arms out a good bit. That was actually my very first sword, and it's from the manufacturer Steel Techniques. You can purchase those through Purple Heart Armory, which is woodenswords.com. Although, of course, it is a steel fencing sword for the sport HEMA. What is HEMA? Historic European Martial Arts. We take textbooks that were written from the 12th century all the way up to the early 1900s on how to sword fight. We then apply what those masters and teachers wrote down and try to recreate it and bring it back to life. And it's almost like an idiot's guide to sword fighting. If this, then that. Hold hand here, twist hips there, step like this. It really, these kind of books really break them down. In fact, a good example is this one. This is The Art of Defense on Foot by Charles Roworth. Charles Roworth was well known for military saber, and he actually kind of became the standard for the British military. And I believe his work is even used to train Marines in the United States military. Marines. True badasses, man. Very much so. So we got a blank space underneath that Steel Techniques sword. That was the home of this one, which is modeled after Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings, although it's a side sword instead of his long sword. Unfortunately, she suffered a catastrophic failure. So I'm going to have to do some repairs on it before I can put this thing back on the battlefield. Tremendous lightweight blade, though. Very, very good for fencing. You can whip. I call this the skinny branch. Whip it around like one. Now, another sword that's not on that wall that's meant to be is the Scottish basket hilt broadsword. Now, that was first made famous in the 16th century. Well, it first appeared in the 16th century, but it really didn't get made famous till the 18th century during the Jacobite Rebellion. The Scots coming down out of the hills, stark naked with a targe in one hand and a broadsword in the other, just barreling right into British infantry and regulars. Terrifying. Terrifying. I mean, they died in droves, but did they ever strike fear into the hearts of their enemies? That's for damn sure. A Scottish broadsword, the best training manual for that, in my opinion, is the one we just looked at, The Art of Defense on Foot. But it's a heavy weapon. It certainly is. It's one that requires some strength training. Now, if we were to look a little bit lower on that wall behind me, below the empty space, we can see an arming sword. The arming sword really first made famous in about the 11th century and was used paired with a, let's see if I can reach it. There we go. A buckler, that little steel shield right there. So the buckler protected your hands while you fought with it. Lightweight, easy to carry. Could sit right on the handle of your sword in an instant. Boom, they both popped out. There was a book. It's the oldest manual on sword fighting that exists in the world, at least that we know of. And it was called the 133 Manual. And it was written by some clerics and monks, complete with illustrations, to teach you how to fight with the buckler and the arming sword. And it does a play-by-play, tremendous book. Difficult, but at the same time, the learning curve is fairly short with the arming sword. It doesn't take much to become competent with it, but it does take a lot to become truly skilled with it. Now, if we were to look below that arming sword here, we can see two bastard swords. Now, a bastard sword is just the in-between of an arming sword and a longsword. Generally, the bastard sword is going to have the exact same blade as a longsword, but it's going to have the handle of an arming sword. What's the difference? Longsword handle can fit both hands. Arming sword handle can only really fit one. But because of the pommel, you can grip it with these fingers, which is where the term hand and a half comes from. And the bastard sword is generally going to be a little bit heavier weight and harder, less well balanced than a longsword. But it certainly has its uses. The ability to toss your shield to the side and two-hand your sword is certainly very, very useful. Now, those two swords are cheap, very heavy, and don't have any flexibility. They're pretty much just strength training devices. I would not call those safe for fighting or anything like that. Hi, Callie. Yeah, that sword wall is badass, isn't it? Now, the last one right there is our naval cutlass. It's modeled after a man named Alfred Hutton, who was famous for taking military saber and applying it to the theater and stage combat. So that sword has got the weight of a feather, very fragile, but still great for sparring and fencing. I would say arguably that might be my favorite of the swords. It really is. I think it's got the best cutting profile. That curve of the blade makes it real nice for cutting. It also makes it real nice for getting around shields and guards if you come in on the backside. That one, low dollar, cheap, $60 piece of shit. But I love it. And then right below that, we've got our formerly Viking arming sword, another cheap wall hanger like these two bastard swords, but still was a great strength trainer until eventually it broke. And my brother and I decided to reforge it into essentially a gladius. It's gladius length, but it's still profiled like a Viking arming sword. So I really would just call it my heavy sax. A lot of fun. Doesn't have any bending ability, so you can't stab with it with any kind of vigor, but it is really great at just moving meat out of the way. So let's see, we are 25 minutes. We're going to loiter for another 5 more, and then I'll go ahead and close down this stream and call it a successful test. Look, we even have one viewer. Isn't that something? Give me just one moment. Like I said, I still got a day job. Let's check in on Hurricane Beryl. Man, storm just made landfall. We've already got 2 confirmed fatalities from it. That's a shame. So Beryl's showing 85-mile-an-hour wind. That certainly is Scary. It looks like the 2 fatalities were due to trees falling in their homes in Harris County. It is a shame. Looks like it's also claimed the lives of 11 others over the past week through Venezuela, Jamaica, Grenada, and St. Vincent, I guess, and now Texas. So at the moment, it looks like more than 2.5 million people are without power as a result of Beryl. Thankfully, it does look like it weakened down to a tropical storm. So after it decimated the Caribbean as a Cat 5, it's calmed down to a tropical storm. So that is excellent news. I think that was always its intent. I think Beryl was a test. It was a test to see what's the biggest hurricane we can make. They don't want to destroy all the infrastructure just yet. Maybe speculation, but I do think Beryl was a test to see what the Bouvet Island weather modification machine was capable of. And I think it's certainly capable of a lot. I don't actually even think they were intending to create a hurricane. I think they were just seeing what happened. Heated up the oceans, snow in Africa, a bunch of twisters and tornadoes in Africa. And this is both things that never happened in that location before. It looks like all the coastlines to the east and west of that blob have been dramatically affected. Of course, all the aquatic life has been impacted, and then hurricane as a result. Pretty early hurricane for the start of hurricane season, especially of that magnitude. It set a record. It's the earliest we've ever seen a Cat 5. But I am very thankful that it's weakened down to a tropical storm now. My prediction, by the end of hurricane season, we're going to see another Hurricane Harvey. And it's going to come from the south, from Bouvet Island, and it's going to work its way up the coast of Africa, and it's going to work its way up into the Gulf. And I think it will, similar to this one, follow the same pathway as the eclipse. I think by the end of this hurricane season, we will experience hurricane rain and flooding in Ohio. Let's check back in at the end of the season and see if that prediction holds true. All right, we got 60 seconds left, and then I'm going to go ahead and close this first live stream test. And then hopefully we will have pleased the YouTube algorithm gods, and they will see fit to promote some of my content so that we can actually get into the juicy, interesting stuff. Maybe down the road, we'll do some intentional live streams, pre-planned news release, things like that. But at the moment, we're still kind of getting our bearings, learning how all of this works, and seeing if it's going to be worthwhile. But as we get into our final 30 seconds, thank you to the hundreds of thousands of you who have tuned in today. And I will see you again in about 15 minutes when episode 10 of Kyle Talks publishes. Yes. And as always, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Cheers.